live. Hello, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us again. It's Thursday. Welcome to the Anchore open source gardening session. My name's Dan. We've got Will, we've got Chris, we've got Keith. We're the Anchore open source engineering team. And essentially, we've got a number of open source tools that are oriented around the idea that you've got an open source project, you've got container images, you've got source code checkouts, stuff like that, some projects. And what our tooling enables you to do is inspect that material. For container images, for example, you can figure out what's inside that container image, what's it made of. All of that in the context of creating so-called actionable documents that are referred to as SBOMs. Right, so we've got our software bill of materials that tells you all about the software you've got, whether it's source code or containers or even a running server. Right? And then with that, we also have a bunch of open source tooling that can take that information and provide some valuable functions on top of it, like tell you what software might be in there that's got some known vulnerabilities with a CVE or GHSA scanner. We've got other tools that can take a really close look at your open source license profile across all of the software that your material has inside of it. Stuff like that. So I mean, we have a number of really cool open source projects. And in this session, we generally go through the projects on GitHub. We look at open PRs, open issues, anything tagged with needs discussion, and we talk about it from an engineering perspective. So with that, I think we can probably jump in. There's a couple of topics that the team has highlighted I'd like to talk about first, and then we'll jump over to the GitHub projects and look at some open issues and PRs with needs discussion. So I'll pass it over to the guys. So what do you guys want to talk about first?
I have a PR up that's going to add some new configs that affect depackage and RPM matching. And I had a surprise implementing it. So I wanted to talk about this. And then I also have to drop midway through the stream. So if I disappear in about 22 minutes, it's not because someone offended me. So right now, depackages and RPMs both have what are called epochs. And an epoch is basically a way of saying, I want to start over version numbering. So imagine you had a project that numbered by like dates or timestamps or something that looks like high integers. Then you want to switch to semver. Well, you can't. That's hard because semver is you get like version 3.2.1 is like not from February 1st, year one, right? Like they're not comparable version schemes. And so epochs on depackages and RPMs are a way of saying, hey, like at epoch 0, all the epoch 0 versions are comparable. But then when we go to epoch 1, like every epoch 1 version is greater than every epoch 0 version. So it's sort of like a like version number. There might not be an awesome example in this text. So anyway, often when people say, I have, I did apt-get install libxml at, version 2.3, there's no epoch there. Maybe the epoch number is up to 4. Like this project has changed its version numbering scheme 4 times. But often tools will just use like latest epoch will be omitted or 0 epoch will be omitted. And so when Grype when Syft creates a package from a depackage or an RPM, it will put the epoch 0 in if no epoch is specified, or it'll be right about the epoch. But if you show up with your own SBOM to Grype, and you don't have epochs in the package, then we have a little bit of a difficulty, which is like, what do we do? Because if we assume the epoch is 0, which is probably the like technically correct spec compliant thing to do, then it might be like, it might be that we're in like epoch 17 and you're going to have like a million false positives because you didn't know to put yourself in epoch 17. Or we could assume that the epoch in the package is like equal to the epoch in the vulnerability. And that kind of makes sense, right? If you're scanning a modern system and you have like modern package on it and a recent CVE. Probably they were both trying to talk about the same epoch and somebody just lost the number, right? And so there's users might have different opinions here because like assuming the epoch is 0 can make a false positive, but probably not make a false negative, right? Because you're basically assuming the package is older than it really is. So you get false positives, but not false negatives. And then assuming that the epoch number between the vulnerability and the package match will potentially eliminate a lot of false positives, but you might accidentally like promote an old package past a bunch of fixes and introduce false negatives. Different users of Syft and Grype are have different risk tolerances, so we like to make stuff like this configurable. Um, so we're going to add 2 modes here. One is called Epoch Strategy 0, which means if a package doesn't have an epoch, the epoch is 0. This strategy is the more risk-averse strategy, right? It makes it so that if we're making a guess about the version of the package, we're assuming it's very old instead of promoting it to be a very recent one. And then the other one is auto, which is basically if the epoch number is missing from the package, also drop it from the vulnerability before comparison. And that is the less risk averse position, but some it might make sense to some people, especially if you don't have control of the SBOM or something, right? If you just have people showing up with SBOMs and you're getting false positives because they have some open source package that's really on epoch 12, but they don't have an epoch number in there, and so it says you're vulnerable to everything because it looks like it's a version of OpenSSL from 2005. And then the thing I think that is probably weirdest about this PR is that the RPM matcher and the dpackage matcher are going to have different defaults. And the reason for that, and I'm open to discussion here, that's why this is the needs discussion. I'm just telling you how the PR is today. But the reason for that is that one of the things we try to do when we change Grype matching behavior in like a subjective way is we try to make an unspecified configuration not change the behavior, right? So we don't change. In other words, when we add a new config, we try to have it so that the default position of that config switch is whatever Grype was doing before we introduced the config. Something we like to do when it makes sense because it keeps people from, oh, I upgraded Grype. Now I've got 322 matches on this image when yesterday I had 0. That's always a little stressful when that happens. And so today in Grype, the RPM matcher is in strategy auto, and the depackage matcher is in strategy 0, unconfigurably. That's just how they work. And so the plan is to make it so that they're both configurable. And the depackage will have the strategy 0 by default, and the RPM matcher will have the strategy auto by default, is the current plan for this PR. There's some great commands in what Dan is showing you if you're trying to follow along at home. I tried to just use Perls, which is a very portable way of doing Grype. If you just give Grype a Perl, especially if it has like a distro qualifier in it, Grype will just do its best. So anyway, that's what I kind of wanted to discuss is like one, the new feature, and two, the 2 very similar matchers having opposite default behaviors because they do now, right? And so my other choice is to like break people's workflow one or the other to make the defaults be the same. And that also feels like a bad choice. So I wanted to talk about it. Chris.
Yeah, I think I have a little bit of, I guess, elimination around that tough choice, where I think there's one incorrect way to go, but there is potential correct way to go where they're both the same. So the incorrect way to go would be to make all of them config 0, because what that would do is that would just make people who have seen clear or almost no reports in their images on the depackage side all of a sudden start seeing a bunch of new severity vulnerabilities that come through. Isn't that correct? Because
It's sorry. So when you say make them, you mean make the default?
Right. The
Right.
default, yeah. So
And
you would
and
blow up their results list, right?
right now the depackage matcher is like more cautious. Like the depackage matcher is in um 0 mode and the RPM matcher is in auto mode. I think maybe you had those switched in your example, but go
No, because
ahead.
what I would suggest is that we would move everything to auto. So the way that in that way we're not prescribing a very like strict way to be about the vulnerability sources, and we're not blowing up lists. If anything, we're taking severities away, and we're very clear about that change.
I, I yeah, I think
Because that was the reason we made RPM auto
I,
in the first place. Like that was the
I,
whole reasoning behind why that one became auto. So
I,
why not
I, I,
apply that to depackage?
I think the issue I have there. So where I started out on this is I learned that the defaults were different like during this implementation. I was kind of surprised. Um, is that like right? Typically, it defaults to the risk averse position, right? In other words, like riskiness is opt in. Like if I want, right, Grype doesn't know the truth, it just knows the data and the heuristics that it has. And so if we can imagine the snob where it's like all the way on one side, it's like, I want all the false positives as long as I don't have any false negatives, right? This is the most risk averse position. Call this cautious Grype. And then all the way on the other side, there's like
Cowboy.
YOLO Grype, which is like, I just want to like I don't ever want to see a false positive. Only give me a match if you're like 100% sure it's vulnerable. And like typically we've made like turning that knob toward the more risk tolerant position opt in. Um I think and so the reason I hesitate like on your suggestion, Chris, I think it's a good one, but it would be making the depackage matcher take a step in the risk tolerant direction by default, and that's not something it's not something I want to do lately. It looks like that was done to the RPM matcher, I think maybe a long time ago. There
Right.
might also be some like sort of cultural and command line differences over like how easy it is to get epochs out of like aptitude versus yum versus DNF or whatever. And so maybe um, missing epochs on RPMs has been historically more common, or the users have been more surprised by them. So yeah,
I think it's a commonality thing. I think epochs are much more common in packages distributed on the RPM side than depackaged. Like they exist on both sides, but it's just from just experience of looking at all those packages for so long in my career, I'm more noticeably seeing the epoch versioning when dealing with the Red Hat RHEL RPM side than anything on depackage. So that's a I feel like if I did the investigation on that hypothesis would be backed up.
I definitely don't have that level of knowledge for sure, but my perspective that what you've done sounds like the right thing to do here, just because of the current state of Grype. I would say it would be a great thing to add an issue to revisit for Grype 1.0 to say, hey, was this the right decision, and should we change this so that we are moving to that more risk averse? Because I agree, like I would instinctively probably do the same thing, like favor false positives over false negatives, and like
Agreed.
this way we're in one case favoring false negatives, and that seems like not Grype's general philosophy.
right.
Yep.
And so
I would agree with that as well from my perspective, like because this absolutely seems like a Grype 1.0 like perfect time to make a change of this magnitude. It's kind of funny too because it's not really like it's not a breaking change in terms of an API or an ABI or the CLI or scripting or anything like that. It's a breaking change in terms of what the output means, and it's that whether or not you're risk averse or risk tolerant, your processes are built around that. And we've seen this a lot where like, even if we make a change that makes those scanning results more accurate, better, etc., the fact that they're different causes substantial turmoil, right? So I think including the substantial difference into the same category as breaking change in APIs makes sense. Unless it's a massive bug, and like obviously we have to, sometimes we have to do that, but this is an optional.
Yeah. So I think that makes sense. I think then we have a little bit of I think we have a decision, which is that pre 1.0 we'll add these configs because there's no reason not to give people these config switches, and we won't change their behavior, right? Like the default is going to be, so 0 and auto I think are reasonably good names, and they will mean the same thing in depackage and RPM matching, but the default will be different. The default in depackage matching will stay 0. The default in RPM matching will stay auto. And we'll revisit this in Grype 1.0. I could see us doing something like when we get closer to there, doing a log.warn saying like, hey, we're guessing epoch versions here. You should check on these configs. They will change in 1.0 or something like that. I would also love to hear from people who have like stronger or maybe more informed opinions than I do about the use of depackage and RPM, and whether epochs are like more or less common or more or less important on one side or the other. Yeah, anyway, that's sort of what I wanted to get. I think we won't change the default behavior in pre 1.0, but when we go to 1.0, I'd like to make both defaults 0, which will make the RPM matcher noisier if you're not setting epochs. But I think, but it's the more risk averse position. Chris?
I'm +1 on hearing more from people who have more experience with this and who deal with the like either package manager individually on like a day-to-day basis, because while I agree that going to 1.0, it would be nice to have all of them in the risk averse position. It might be a case where this is an exception where our choice of it splitting and it depending on which distro and which like kind of package manager is used is the correct choice. Because let me put it this way. If on the D package side, if there are only epochs very like rarely, then you want to be super sure that whenever you're catching everything, that there are no fault, that like in the realm of false positives, you're not getting a false negative because of the rarity. Whereas on the RPM side, they're so ubiquitous and used in so many attempts of like bumping and moving around that the 0 config actually provides more noise than you care to even try to parse as a security engineer. So because like if that strata exists between the two and we get confirmed reports from like people who are the experts, then it might make sense to keep these separated because of just the ecosystems and how they treat the use of epochs amongst them.
Do you think this is something that we should include in the Grype DB, right? Like Grype DB today has a way that we can specify the version format. And what that says is we get a version in a package, we get a version in the Grype DB, and when we compare them, Grype DB says, use this version format. And we do that because we think we know what the right thing is, and we think that's going to give us the best results. Is this something that we might actually add to the version information to say, this makes the most sense to default to epoch auto or 0 for like this specific comparison?
I don't think so. The reason I don't think so is like the epoch is already sort of trivially parsable out today. And so like one thing, if the epoch is 0, and for most packages, the epoch is 0 because they've never incremented their versioning scheme. If the epoch is 0, these configs have no effect because 0 equals 0, whether or not, right, you're either removing the 0 colon prefix from one side of the equation or assume it or appending it to the other side. It doesn't, so it's sort of like these configs already only have an effect in cases where we expect it to matter. So I'm not sure how I would put better information than that into the database. Does that answer the question?
Yes.
Maybe.
Yeah, I
Let,
mean,
let me.
another, oh, sorry, go ahead, Keith.
Well, I was just going to say, like, hypothetically, let's say I have something, and for some reason I do introduce an epoch, but generally speaking, the versions have been sequential. I think I've seen a couple of examples of this. I don't remember exactly what they were, but um, something like there's a 1.0 and 1.2 and 1.3, and then there was also a 1.2 that was kind of epoch 1 and 1.3 and 1.4, and then like a 1.3 that was epoch 2. And so like there are a bunch of like really old versions that were all kind of muddled together, which we don't really see too often. And then like most of the versions now are just like far past them. I guess in that case, we're just, if we did the zero scheme, then that would be more or less the right thing to do anyway. Yeah. All right. All right.
Yeah, I mean, your question made me think, maybe we shouldn't skip, because we're having the discussion, this sort of like step way back and say, well, the optimal solution here would involve not having to guess, right, in either case. But I don't think that information exists, right? Is there a map somewhere that says for package X in RPM, the version scheme for epoch 0 was this regular expression, the version scheme for epoch 1 was this other regular expression, version scheme for epoch 2? Because if we had that, then it would be conceivable at least to encode that information such that if someone gave us a version number without an epoch, that we could look up, which epoch did that version number come from, then we wouldn't have to guess. We could actually apply the appropriate one. I'm just saying, like, that's the reason why this is complicated, is that we have to guess, and it's based on information that doesn't exist. But I just wanted to double check, like, is that true? I've never seen a source that shows that level of information, because if it did, we could encode it into the database, and then the matching would be perfect.
I haven't either, and it's also like I'm not sure it's possible, because like what's old is new again, right? And so people might like epoch 5 might like the regex for epoch 5 and epoch 3, there might be like a million strings they both match.
Maybe that's why.
And in which case that doesn't, yeah. So I think my really preferred solution is don't give us SBOMs with no epoch on your D packages and RPMs, because it forces the tools downstream to guess.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that's like my most preferred solution. But failing that, I think this PR is not terrible. Okay.
Yeah, although maybe that's worth writing down as well. Is like maybe this is just a not for this PR, but I could imagine a scenario where if there's a vulnerability that refers to an epoch, we have a Boolean piece of information, which is that this package is epochable. And if we're making a guess for that specific case, a little warning could pop up just to let people know, like, hey, you should put an epoch in your SBOM for this package because it is an epochable package. Otherwise, we're guessing according to these configuration values. Like that's possible. I'm not sure it's the right answer, but it's possible to actually surface that. We do have that information.
Right. No, and that's a good point, especially if we have a vulnerability like where the version constraint has a non-zero epoch. But like, not only is this a package that could have an epoch, it's a package that should. The other thing we could do, and I don't know if it's going to be in this PR, maybe a follow-up PR, is we could put a third position on the switch called fail,
Right.
which people have asked for before, where we just like, Grype RPM missing epoch strategy equals fail, and we just like exit 1 if we're missing an epoch and we need it. And then that's a bug with whatever system gave us the SBOM. Because I think increasingly people, like, we've had that request for Syft, where someone said like, hey, Syft is trying to guess Python versions based on this requirements TXT. Don't guess, fail. Like if something's underspecified, I just want the tool to fail to build, and we'll go back and specify it better. Which I think that might be a
That's like an
Go ahead.
that kind of the far edge of the risk averse. Like you don't want any guessing, right? You want actual fail because you might be in a position to take action on that and adjust the data so that you avoid the heuristics. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Thanks for the discussion. I'm gonna disappear pretty soon, so I'll let the next person pick the
Thanks,
next
Will.
issue. Yeah.
Excellent. Well, thanks on that one. So it sounds like we're thumbs up on the PR. Let's see. Next up, we had one from Keith. We got 4558. You guys want to go there next?
Yeah, I wanted to readdress the component and subcomponent discussion we had from last week because I think one, we had a contributor give us a PR about Vex product and subcomponents. Two, Keith took a stab at this, right? Or
Well,
this
no,
is no, this is the Go version primary evidence. Let's talk about
yeah,
that.
yeah, this is a different thing.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I was just going in chat order.
Yeah, there was another thing, but I think like this is the one I think we did talk about the other one a lot last week. So anyway, what this is about is we had some feedback that some of the binary classifiers are giving some questionable results. Okay, and so I'll explain what's happening here. The binary classifier is one of our least favorite things in Syft, but some of the material we can't really identify in any other way. It's not part of a package manager. It's, let's say you have just a Python binary sitting on the file system. Well, we're able to find that, but it's because Syft, looks at the bytes and finds some version information in there. And the binary classifier, it's kind of brittle, and there are a lot of cases where, let's say the binary itself doesn't actually have the information that we need to find the version. And so what we do is look in some other places. So using Python as an example, we find a Python binary and we can't find a version in it. We then go look for a libPython that's linked from that binary. And if we find that and we're able to extract the version, then what we have is we have a package with two different locations in it. One of those locations is the Python binary, and the other version is the libPython. And so the thing here also, Golang kind of does a similar thing. If the Go binary itself is found, but we can't extract the version from it, then we go and look for this version file to find the version. And again, we have those two locations. And so this one, the Go one was especially weird because we had something that was only looking for the version. So if you didn't even have a Go binary anywhere, but there was a version file that had some Go looking version in it anywhere on the entire file system, it was reporting you have the Go binary here. And so as what this PR is doing, it's changing that behavior a little bit. So what it does is it first looks for a Go binary, tries to extract the version, and if it can't find it, then looks for this version file and and surfaces something if it's able to figure out the version from a version that's near, like in a known location near the Go binary. Anyway, but what the real question here is in all of those cases, without any other changes, what's happening is the locations of all of those files that were searched are being returned as primary evidence. And there's some confusion because a version file being referred to as primary evidence doesn't make a lot of sense. And what the reporter wanted to do is like, hey, go tell me where this Go file is. But I can't really programmatically tell from the results that you're given because I have multiple locations. They're both primary evidence. The version file is this other thing. So the question that I have for the group here is, and I kind of talked about this with some other people, and we think this makes sense, but the question that I have is, if we're in a situation where we find a binary file and we have to search some other file to find some supplemental information, it seems to me like the primary evidence is that we found this binary file, and we want to still return both of the places where we find the evidence. but instead of reporting them both as primary evidence, mark the other ones as supplemental. So we have like those are the only two different evidence types that we have in the system today, but primary evidence and supporting evidence, sorry. And so this PR is doing that. The yet more specific question that I have is there, so I think this makes like perfect sense for like the Go and the version file. Like if we just find a version file and no Go binary anywhere, we shouldn't really be surfacing a result there, I think. But Python and Ruby, and maybe a few other things, but definitely Python and Ruby, they have the behavior that you might not actually have the Python binary, but you have the libPython. And so there are cases where we actually want to return that as the primary evidence. And there are cases where we want that to be supporting evidence when we also found the binary. I know that was very long-winded, but this is kind of a very detailed thing that I had a question about. So like the question is like, does that make sense? And secondarily, the way that these things are all kind of like put together, there's this like merge step. So we have two different classifiers, one that finds the like Python binary and the Python library, and another one that just finds the Python library. So my heuristic here is if I merge things together and I have something and I have evidence, so they're both the same library file. If they're the same library file, don't include a duplicate, right? And what that does is it lets the one that found the binary file plus the library, which is already marked as supporting evidence, sort of like omit this other primary evidence of the same duplicate file. And like it achieves the result of the binary is the thing that's like primary. So that's the very long-winded way of like saying, does that all make sense to people?
I think you lost me on the last section of the omission and the deduplication, but I also had a quick question about when you have and find the binary and also the version file next to it, is the only evidence we have that the version file belongs to that binary is that that they're siblings in the directory tree? And then how is that like relationship tracked and or like maintained throughout Syft when we're doing the classifying?
The only, well, in this particular case, for the Go version file, the relationship is it only finds those files if it's up a directory. Like that's just how the directory layout seems to be.
Right.
And it contains a Go type version. So, you know, like Go 1.24, for example, or something like that. Right. And that's pretty rare, I think, for like any other versions to have that very specific Go version. And like before it was just kind of like looking for that everywhere. But so I guess to answer your question, like the classifier is the thing that has the definition of like how it finds all of the material. So beyond that, like there's nothing that I can think of that would indicate, other than the locations, that it was found relative to the thing, maybe. I guess maybe I'm not quite sure what you're asking beyond that, or if I got the right idea.
No, that makes sense. I guess I just didn't know if if the secondary evidence was part of the classifier itself, or if it was like going into the file cataloger and asking like, is there a relationship that allows me to attribute this version to the discovery of this version file to the discovery of this binary to this thing?
Yeah, this is part of it's all the classifier definition has that. So like you'd go look at the found by classifier, in our case, look at the code, and like that's what how you would be able to tell. I mean, and that's pretty typical for like a lot of those things, because some of them are sort of complicated. Unfortunately, we don't love the binary classifiers. And okay, so the thing that you were asking about, let's see. This is a yet more complicated case. So let's take two different images as an example. One image has libPython only. The other image has Python binary and libPython. Okay, so in the case of the libpython only, it is binary. We have a classifier that finds libpython, finds the version, and it surfaces that package. All right. In the case of the other image where there's a Python binary and libpython, we have that same classifier that finds the libpython, finds the libpython, another classifier that finds the Python binary also finds libpython separately. And so now we have two different packages and they get merged together. And we have three locations, the Python binary and the libpython in one result. And in the other one, just the libpython. Okay, but those libpythons are in the same location. So what we end up with is duplicate locations in the Syft output, right? So we have like Python binary, libpython, and libpython again, and they're
Right.
the exact same spot. And that's always been really confusing to me why we would ever really do that, because it's like the same location.
Totally agree.
And so,
Yep.
and so now this PR changes it to check the locations, and if like we already have the same location represented, skip it from like when we do the merge.
I
Right.
gotcha. Okay, that makes sense. I think I was trying to relate that back to like the secondary and primary evidence. I didn't understand how that.
Yeah, well,
They're two separate things into the same PR.
two separate things, and so like specifically the Python case where there's a binary and the libpython. In that case, the libpython is marked as secondary evidence or supporting evidence. And then in the case in the result that just has the libpython is marked as primary evidence.
Yeah.
Right? But because it gets deduplicated from the locations, we only have one primary evidence in the result.
Right.
And if we don't have a Python binary, we still get the libpython result with primary evidence pointing to the libpython that it was found in.
Yeah.
So I think that's makes the most sense to me given our limitations in the binary classifier here. But
I agree. I think ultimately the PR that you've put together, and I'm stating this out loud because just to kind of double check, not to assert, but is like what we're going to end up with is a record that doesn't have any duplication. So in locations, seeing two different records for the same path doesn't make any sense to people or parsers. That's confusing. And B, if there's more than one location, there should only be one primary and everything else is supporting, and which one gets chosen at merge time is contingent on the classifier itself, I would imagine, because it might depend on what ecosystem you're in. Back to the previous topic where it's like, in Golang, it's pretty stable that, there's a dot version. If it conforms to a certain pattern, like each one of these, especially runtimes, has a little bit of a heuristic around it. But if ultimately what we end up with is, if there's more than one thing, one is primary and the other are supporting, and there's no duplication, I think that is the right outcome. If there's only one thing, it should be primary. It doesn't make sense to me. The only thing I think we haven't talked about is that if there's only one thing and it's supporting, that sounds a little confusing because what is it supporting?
Right. Yeah. So in this case, there would never be, as far as I know, there would never be that case.
Right. Okay.
Right. There like would have been, because
right.
before it was looking for this version file, which
exactly.
I think it's like you should never say is primary evidence for a binary being present.
Yeah.
And so like, but that's no longer the case. So like, it would always be associated with a primary Go binary now. Yeah, and there should be only one. I think like there could be some convoluted thing that I haven't accounted for where there are multiple primaries still, but there wouldn't be duplicate locations where like any of that, you know what I mean? Like there would. So it seems like the right thing to do for now. We can always tweak it later, but binary classifier is just getting more and more complicated, and I wish we had a better way to find some of this stuff, but don't know what that way is yet.
Community, look into elf headers. We like elf headers. Elf headers are cool. That would be amazing.
Yes.
If folks don't know, there's there's been this thing happening along the way where some ecosystems are adding structured information, which there's a standard for, into binary ELF headers, which actually articulate like metadata about the binary. And it is super powerful for use cases like the ones we like to solve here. And Syft does have an ELF header cataloger. So, some distributions are even starting to move towards that. I think Fedora, notably, is starting to, by default, I think they have for a bit, add
Yeah.
ELF headers. Unfortunately, that's an ecosystem we don't need the ELF headers in because the metadata exists somewhere else. But boy, it's really nice. You can put little JSON payloads at the top of the binary, and it has version information and architecture and all sorts of nice things that then, if those are present and everybody knows how to read it because it's a standard format, it very much removes a ton of ambiguity and the need for guessing or carrying around giant data sources with fingerprints and stuff like that.
Yeah, and it makes everything going forward a lot easier to do. Like for older analyses and things that you find before these were implemented, you're still going to have the same what is this blob of thing that I'm holding? But the more people get on board with that and the more they start publishing binaries with that standard at the top, the easier it will be to catalog and then forward that metadata over to some vulnerability scanner or something that can actually match and say, what was this thing that you found on the other side of the fence? So that's pretty sweet.
And also the nice thing is that even in the cases where, let's say somebody builds a container and, from scratch in a multi-stage build, copies some binaries over, like we can still find the stuff there
Yep.
if they don't include the package manager. So
yeah,
definitely.
Distroless use cases, hardened container image use cases, all that you don't have to carry a separate piece of metadata in a registry in OCI format and help people carry that along as they're moving containers between registries. Like it's a very good way, and easier for sure, but also like importantly accurate. Like that's the way to get accurate information, to have that information like encoded in the thing itself. In a lot of use cases, so yeah, definitely cool. But I'm sorry, that was a bit of a tangent. But yeah, I think +1 all around on your proposal, Keith.
Sounds good. What do we got next? I think Chris had another.
Right, I have one that came up this week that I kind of wanted to talk about just for a little bit. It's a PSA slash also maybe not help wanted, but man, if your day-to-day is on the Windows box and you want to investigate this, please. I'm kind of slammed with a bit of work right now, so I've only taken a cursory look at this, but let me give the high-level view of what this user found and what we kind of want to achieve with this issue. So this user scanned the same Bitnami legacy image with Grype, both on Windows and on OS X. And he found a really cool kind of, they say bug in this case, where the file metadata and the file cataloging on Windows was woefully incomplete compared to how we were doing it on Mac OS. And again, this isn't a directory scan. This is a container scan. So ideally, these should be one-to-one the same across the systems, no matter what.
Yeah.
So the issue that was found was that our file, basically how we were doing file cataloging was getting choked at the metadata level, where I did a bit more analysis of just, what was the difference between the files and the two different SBOMs that came through. And we weren't finding any time zone data, any man pages, any CA certificates, any locals. We have a lot of null MIME types for Windows that came up, and a lot of the what would have been plain text we were just unable to pull out of the container. So there's some error case that's getting swallowed during the file cataloging that is making it so the Syft SBOM isn't being populated with the full file tree data. And what that then leads to is if you look at the top summary that this user gave us, Windows found 7 more packages than OS X did. And what that is telling me is that since the file cataloging has been proven to be incomplete and we're finding more packages, it means that our file overlap by ownership relationship is not firing, and these I guess really hot packages are making it through on the Windows side. And what do I mean by hot packages? I mean that when you have a package that doesn't get eliminated by the file overlap ownership, it is a package that Grype is going to consider outside of the band of something that is distributed by a distro maintainer. So let's say like Python that's owned by the RHEL security team, or Python that's owned by some upstream maintainer that security fixes are being applied to, is actually being evaluated as just this raw Python interpreter at this version. And what that can lead to is a lot more false positives in the case of like critical vulnerabilities or things that otherwise the distro hints and security teams and maintainers have already kind of pushed down and said, nope, these aren't applicable because we've pushed the patch, or we've like this version, the one that's found through the package manager, is not vulnerable to these things. So if you're using Syft on Windows and then by, transitive property using Grype, you might be seeing hotter results for containers than you would otherwise see if you were using on a Linux distribution or on OS X. So we're hot on the heels of like why this bug is happening, but we need to do the development on the Windows box just to get the debugging and figuring out where the error is being swallowed and make sure it's one-to-one, then matching up with the results on a Linux distro. But yeah, this is something that was found this week, and we want to be proactive and kind of make sure that when you're scanning a container, no matter the base operating system, we're getting the same result.
Yeah, that's definitely surprising.
Dan's shaking his head. I'm so sorry, Dan, to unleash this one.
No, it's a really it's a really good find, but I'm yeah, I don't know. Do you think it's an error, or do you think it's like there's a library that's not like I'm not sure. I'm not sure where in the turtle stack this is going to be,
So
forking
why my
on.
hypothesis is that it's an error is that if you look at the subdirectory analysis that I did, the key differences in like the user and like what's found, you see how under user share, there's so much stuff that just isn't being included on the Windows side. I think during the file cataloging process, it only gets like partially the way through, and then some error stops it, and that gets swallowed and doesn't fire that, Syft fully errors out. It's just like the internal process of the file cataloging goes, we've hit an error, it populates what it can, and then it generates a partial SBOM based on the packages found in the package cataloging, the binary classifier. Like everything else is running. All the other concurrent stuff in that middle layer is running correctly. And when it gets to the assembly
Yeah.
of the SBOM, the file cataloger has some error that's going, I had to stop for some reason. And that's what I'm investigating right now. And why that's getting swallowed, how can we go forward and do the full parsing of the file tree when we're on Windows? And can we even update it to where it just errors out completely and doesn't even generate an SBOM if it can't do the same thing that it can do on the other distros or the other base operating systems?
I mean, we've definitely seen a couple of cases where there's the slippery file path versus path in Go. If one gets
Mm-hmm.
used in the wrong case,
Mm-hmm.
something bad happens. Generally speaking, I think we're pretty careful to do the right thing there. But that's one of those first things that comes to mind for me when you start talking about Windows and Unix type differences. But I
Yeah,
think
but this is all analysis that's happening in the container, right? It loads the
yeah,
container the same. Docker should be the same across. Like once you jump into that Docker context and start doing the analysis, like it should be one to one.
Yeah.
So what glue layers exist where that could be getting messed up? Because this has been like kind of we got it in a few days ago, and I've been stepping back to it when I've had a little bit of breathing time just to be like, okay, let's investigate. But the outer dev loop on this is hard too, because I mean, I have a Windows box, but like I'm jumping between that Windows box. I have my actual development machine. Tried to do it on a VM. I wasn't getting the same results that I was getting in my Windows box on a VM. So I just like didn't want to solve the developing environment problem and just wanted to get where I had the same results as the user on Windows. Any, yeah. So this is like kind of a plea for if anyone finds this interesting and is developing day to day on a Windows box, like that's their main machine and they use Syft and Grype as a Windows user, have at it. Like this is open. I'm investigating this as much as I can right now, but I have a couple other commitments that I'm trying to get across the line as well, and I don't want this to bog those down.
It also seems like one of those issues where there's a point, and if that point can be found, everything else will be fine. Um, it feels like that
Yeah, I agree. I
to
was
your
looking for
point,
like
this
that
is
magical thread.
yeah, it's in a container image, so we're not on the Windows environment. So you got like tar files and the implementation, and then
Could be that.
the Golang file interface on top of
Yeah.
the tar file descriptors. You've got like the default encoding stuff. I highlighted UTF-16 LE versus UTF-8.
No, that one's annoying because even what if
Yeah.
you also PSA, if you try and do this, and let's say you generate an SBOM on Windows, but then you have like a virtual environment that's like Linux or some other like file encoding, you have to encode the file to UTF-8 to inspect it and work with it before going back and forth machines. That's also like UTF-16 is also the worst UTF encoding. I'm not going to get on that rant for this issue, but see me at me later and debate me in public space if you want to.
Yeah, but there's some point at which there's a bad interaction, and then after that, everything's just missing, right? That explains what you're seeing. But finding that point, I feel like would be very satisfying if somebody has some experience about the the components involved here. You guys probably know better than I if there's more than that. It's like tar, Golang file interface. I don't know what else there is before we get to stereoscope.
I hadn't checked that the layers being unzipped into tars and what those look like before being sent into stereoscope. So maybe that's my next place to inspect because I was full down like all the way across the stack of okay, I'm already here and the files are choked and not it. So I was like unwinding the stack and I hadn't gotten to that unwinding spot yet. So yeah, it's it's a process.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, so like one of those things, the main things to me are like file separators, symlinks are different. And so like if you hit any of those things and for some reason there's a Windows specific call that is invoked, even though it's not really dealing with a Windows file system,
Right.
when it's looking through the tars, then like that's the type of thing that's easily like, it doesn't have a backslash or it doesn't have a forward slash anymore. And um,
Yeah, I mean, it could be that. It could be exactly that, Keith, right? Like if you ask the tar interface for like, what is the path of this file? You can kind of interact with tar files like a file system. You're going to get back something, and that something is maybe in Unix form for a certain encoding in tar, where it's a
Yeah.
soft link. And so what it's referring to is dot dot forward slash dot dot forward slash dot dot forward slash foobar. But then if we're treating that as through the Go file interface, pass that in, and it's like I have no idea what you're talking about because on Windows that is not a valid path. Like,
yeah,
it
I mean,
could be
stereoscope.
exactly that, right? I don't know. I mean,
But then it
Well,
would fail. It would fail for everything, right? Like, why is it getting partial results? Like, how are some things coming through?
well,
If
soft links might be handled differently,
Hmm.
or relative paths. I don't know why. Like the data you have is really confusing, but like user lib has a lot of soft links in it, for example,
It's true.
on Linux systems, because you have like libc.so links to libc.so.1, links to libc.so.1.1.2, and that's the actual file. Like there's conventions like that where you'll see like a 2-3x ratio of soft link to real files. I'm
Right.
just, I'm not, yeah, it's possible.
There's, a, there's also a fun mystery on here too, where Windows is finding one file that everything is contiguous. Like OS X finds everything that Windows does. Windows is lacking except for one thing. If you scroll to the bottom, where I did my analysis and I like generated on both sides, yeah, file overlap, just up a section above the tables. Windows only files opt bitnami dot bitnami components.json. Windows is like yeah, that's a file, and that enters in the SBOM. And for whatever reason on Mac and even on Linux too, that gets dropped. So that's another like that's like a side quest of why that's happening.
Hmm.
That is peculiar for sure.
That is, yeah.
Okay.
Yes, well, good call out,
Does
Chris.
this okay, I need to ask the question. Does this container image, we're pulling it by digest. So, and
It's the same. I checked. I made sure. I made sure
and
to go to
that
yeah,
digest isn't the fat manifest, it's the actual architecture specific.
actual architecture. Yeah. 1000%.
Okay, yeah, because Windows can have that redirect or that reference based on the platform. I don't, but Debian 12, there shouldn't be a Windows build.
Yeah, there isn't. Thankfully,
Yeah,
we don't live in that world.
I checked that one.
Yeah.
Hang on, I'm gonna post in the YouTube chat as well. This is the ocidag.dev link, and this is what I use when I can't like when I'm switching between terminals and stuff, and I don't want to like remember the crane or Docker commands to pull the manifests and inspect them. I use this little helpful GUI on in the browser to check that the thing that I'm using is not like the fat manifest and is actually like the image and is what is being pulled across environments um, for the given shot. So that's a helpful little tool to inspect OCI images.
I guess while we're on the topic of Windows, there's one other thing that, maybe to note here, which is that today we don't like we do have these images because we don't have any Windows testing in CI. And so like I've done a bunch of work to make some cross-platform tools that we've been pretty slow to roll out, but we do have a plan to enable Windows testing for all of the tools. It's kind of like a shame we don't have it today, but we are in fact working on that. We Windows users are very valuable too.
Sorry the nerd snipe you, Dan. You look concerned.
No,
So
no, it's just intriguing, right? I mean, for sure, but definitely
yeah,
something we need more
imagine when we saw this one at like 9:15 in the morning on a Wednesday. We were like, oh, this is gonna take, and then like our whole triage time went to just like doing the investigation for this and making sure
Yeah.
it was what we thought it was.
And this your analysis is for this image. I just want to ask because I might.
Exactly for that image. Yeah, I generated both SBOMs, one on my Windows machine, one on OS X, put them all on the same context, and then I just started running JQ against that and finding the differences and stuff.
Okay. All right.
And I dropped a link to the type of thing that I was talking about.
Oh, the file path clean in with the metadata?
Yeah, I mean, it's probably not that exact thing, but like that's something we probably should be using path for in stereoscope, because that's dealing with images, not the OS, not the file system on the OS you're on, right?
Right.
Those are the types of things that will add like a backslash instead of a forward slash, and then mess up everything. So like if we resolve a symlink, we concatenate something together with a file path join, all of a sudden it doesn't work to find something because
Right, because it uses the context that the program's running on Windows, so it goes, oh, you must file path goes, you must be Windows. I'm going to use this logic.
yep, exactly. So like I'm seeing a handful of file path things in there. Some of them look applicable, like finding known hosts in your local SSH and stuff like that. But
But it's annoying because for some of the things too, well, not for Stereoscope because it doesn't work on the directory scans and stuff like that. So maybe it is just for. Okay, I'll dig into that. I'll dig into that part.
yeah,
Yeah.
I'll if I get some extra time this week, I'll try to take a peek too. This is definitely a little concerning.
Yep. Yeah. Excellent. Thank you for the report. By the way, and thanks, Chris, for digging into it and raising it. Great one for discussion.
Big thanks to HC.
Yep.
I don't want to mispronounce your name, but HC, thank you very much for the report. We really appreciate it.
Very nice. Okay, well, sorry we're at time. Before I was starting to type in a bunch of stuff to look into this. We are at time, so I think we're going to call it for today. So I just wanted to say thank you, everybody, as usual, for joining us live or viewing this session later. Hope to see you on the next one. And if not, we'll see you online. We'll see you in the GitHub project page. Feel free to contribute to these discussions over on our projects. Otherwise, have a great rest of week and great rest of day. Thanks all. Take care.